Let's start. So, Assalamu alaikum, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. On behalf of Supply Chain Talks, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's live webinar. This is the second part of the second series on the Strait of Hormuz. We had the earlier one on 30th of March. And after the session, Farooq and I got together and we discussed, let's do a second one as well, that we need to talk more on the air, land, and sea part of it as well. So today's webinar's topic is Beyond the Crisis, Building Multi-Modal Logistics Resilience across Saudi Arabia and the GCC. So thank you all for joining us from across the kingdom, the GCC and beyond. Today, again, we have a lot of registrations, and our registrations, they span across approximately 25 to 30 countries, which is a good sign. So the recent pressure on regional trade corridors has once again highlighted how closely logistics continuity, business resilience, and supply chain discussion making are connected. For many organizations, the conversation is no longer only about managing disruption in the moment. It is also about how to strengthen networks, diversify response options, improve visibility, and build greater resilience for what comes next. That is exactly what today's discussion is intended to address. We want this session to remain practical, business focused, and forward looking. Our objective is to explore the operation challenges being faced across sea, air, and land logistics, and more importantly, the strategies that leaders can adopt to respond with agility and confidence. Once again, I'm very pleased to share that this session is being moderated by Mr. Farooq Sheikh, CEO of LogiPoint, who brings deep sector experience and valuable regional insights to the conversation. We are honored to be joined by an outstanding panel of industry leaders. Firstly, Ms. Aruna Hussain. She is the Global Head of Landside Depot and Cargo Risk Management at AP Moller Maersk. Then we are joined by Mr. Jaber Salam, CEO of Alpha Cargo Services and a very great AI enthusiast. We had good conversation around AI a few days back only. And Mr. Gaurav Biswas, who is known to all as the founder and CEO of Trucker, who has brought land transport and technology together. We sincerely appreciate them for taking the time to join us and share their perspectives. We will begin with a moderated discussion followed by the audience Q&A towards the end of the session. I encourage everyone joining us to stay engaged and to share your questions through the chat. With that, let me officially welcome you once again, and I now hand over to our moderator, Mr. Farooq, to lead the session. Over to you, Farooq.
Thank you, Roman. Good evening, everyone. Today we have a constellation of business leaders who have been in GCC and beyond. And this is continuation of our previous webinar where we had most of the logistics service providers who were end users. And one of the comments raised was that, yes, we are the end users, but the people behind providing the logistics backbone, the infrastructure investment, the network deployer, it would be interesting to have them. So today, taking from that cue, we have invited Ms. Aruna, Mr. Gaurav, and Mr. Jaber to share their thoughts on the recent developments in the region, which has implications way beyond, not only in economic terms, but also in logistics supply chain management and in simple terms, putting food on the table across the globe as the source of energy still remains in the Middle East. So saying that, I'm not sure if Gaurav has dropped out due to some technical reasons, but Naman will...
I'm here.
Sorry.
No, he's here.
Oh, all right, Gaurav. Sorry, because couldn't see you, that's why. So we'll start with all three panelists, starting from Aruna, as to what do you see as two top challenges from ocean freight as well as cargo risk perspective?
Can I maybe, hi Farooq, and thank you for having me. It's been a long time that we've met. Can I maybe just start by talking about the disruption and the fact that, in my opinion, customers are not really dealing with one disruption at the moment. In fact, they're dealing with at least three, if not more. First of all, we have the physical disruption, which is the Strait of Hormuz. As we all know, vessels that were crossing almost 100, 130 vessels a day down to single digits, which means almost a 90-95% collapse. The upper Gulf ports that we have, Jebel Ali, Dammam, Hamad, they are all either congested with stranded cargo or operating at very, very reduced capacity. So there's the physical infrastructure that is completely and fundamentally changed. Second, we have the predictability disruption, which means that customers can tolerate delay. In fact, customers can tolerate delays, but what they cannot tolerate is not knowing. When a customer asks, where is my container? And the answer they get is, we are not sure because our GPS is jammed, then that really destroys the planning confidence. So we've seen almost 1,100 vessels, or if not more, where the GPS or AIS jamming has taken place, which means that the tools that we have built and invested in over many years on visibility, that has been completely degraded. The third, and I would say one of the bigger disruption is the cascading disruption. In other words, this is not just about shipping. So you mentioned the ocean piece here. But in my mind, it really just isn't about shipping because, as you know, GCC countries import over 70% of their food through the Gulf routes. The Gulf produces nearly half of global urea, fertilizer exports, and I wrote about that also. That affects agriculture across South Asia, across Africa. We got helium, petrochemicals, aluminium, all of these supply chains have been disrupted. So the customer conversation isn't just about when does my container arrive from an ocean lane. In my mind, it's really about, will my production shut down in the next week? So in my mind, that is the challenge that we really have to solve for, and not just about moving cargo on disrupted trade lanes, but about having the certainty to make decisions. And that's the gap in my mind that needs to be fixed.
Thanks, Aruna. Moving to Gaurav. Gaurav, you have been over a decade engaged in land transport. And of course, there is a disruption on the sea side, and which puts a pressure on the land element and inland transportation because we have coast to coast. How do you see this disruption playing out? How it is impacting the land transport in your view?
Yeah, no, sure, Farooq, I hope you can hear me. So yes, trucker is a full truckload, long haul trucking focused. So typically port movements are something that we only do for select clients who do a lot of long haul with us. But since the 7th of March, we have significantly scaled our supply to the land bridges. We started doing Khor-Fakkan port from 7th March, and now we do at least 5 different ports on the east and western edge of GCC. On the land bridge solution, moving bonded cargo to the original port of destination. But I think the biggest thing is, on top of what Aruna was mentioning, I think it's uncertainty is the biggest risk. A lot of clients are adjusting to temporary price hikes, but what they are not able to get, regardless of what price they pay, is the ability to, ascertain when their raw material feeds are going to come in or their exports, backlogs are going to be created. And I think that's where 3 or 4 different stakeholders are really doing their best, which is the shipping line in terms of providing information of the manifest and which port they would actually finally end up dropping. Then the ports in terms of their container handling capacity. I know Khor-Fakkan pretty much, scaled 5 to 6 times their February numbers in March, and it is operating absolutely at scale, getting support from other ports with equipment and things like that. Then is the, coordination that happens for the dispatches. I think that is where we play a lot of roles. So we are now average doing around 2,000 TEUs a day on various of the land bridge solutions alone. And that is very much based on trying to digitize that information exchange that happens once the container is expected to come to the port and then gets converted into a final land bridge that gets delivered to, the destination. But more importantly, I think these are all temporary things which are happening. But I think a lot of this right now, where businesses like ours and everybody on this call, I'm sure there are lots of clients on this call. I think communication is key. I think being able to make it that much more intense to get that feasibility, because shipping lines often don't know whether the port will offload them and when they will offload. But once they are able to do that, I think that communication flow teams and all these, when the logistics departments, whether you're a trucker or a nurse or a client, I think that needs to be intensified. Things are not digital, and I think that's for us. I feel this is a COVID kind of opportunity. Trucker really scaled up during when the COVID phase 1 hit, and we increased that in the second and third phase of COVID. So this is where we're also showing that, hey, how digitization is not just a theoretical thing. If you're still tracking your shipments on Excel sheets and your teams are communicating on WhatsApp, then this is where a lot of this falls apart faster than others. I think that should be a permanent thing. And I think other than that, pricing is a challenge. We are pretty much transparent pricing. Our clients get a visibility of our cost. So that helps them to understand that we're trying to share the pain and not trying to profiteer. Otherwise, a lot of pricing across the sector is happening with contingency over contingency and all of that, which like we were very quick to tell our clients that we can't do fixed contracts anymore, where average contracts used to be procured for 3 months to 6 months, prices used to be fixed. We've moved all of that to spot, but in exchange, we've started providing the exact buying prices that transporters are servicing the platform. So clients are able to see that, okay, this is not profiteering from trucker perspective. So that, I think, is the third challenge that could be solved in the short term if people are a bit more practical long term. Your client's going to stay with you when you are trying to help them when the going goes rough.
Yeah, thanks, Gaurav. Jabir, coming to you now, one of the less talked about areas when we discuss logistics, obviously due to sheer size and volume, we may pay more focus on ocean or the land transport, but we don't talk that much about air freight. Okay. Now, during COVID, freight really came to the fore, especially due to supply of medical equipment, masks, and everything. How do you see today's disruption to air freight in the region?
Thank you, Farooq. Let me just tell you the hats we wear first and then address the question. So the company I represent, Alpha Cargo Services, was born as a forwarder. We were turned into a regulated agent in about 2012, pioneered movements connected to the Hajj flow in terms of passenger baggage handling and also cargo. Alongside that, we turned into a GSA. Besides that, like Numan mentioned, with an eye on the future, we also embraced the opportunity when we were nominated by the IATA Cargo Operations and Technology Board to contribute to the Interactive Cargo Task Force. So first of all, thank you to Numan and yourself for accepting me as part of this panel. The challenge we see today as a forwarder, perhaps, is to keep our commitments to our customers. In terms of commitments to customers, generally air cargo, as you rightly say, we don't carry all the volume. We don't have the privilege of carrying most of the volume. But an interesting stat, which is often quoted by my colleagues at IATA, is that while we carry only 3% of the cargo volume worldwide, we carry about 33% of the 8 trillion value that we move by air. So generally, as you can understand, we are looked upon for the high value shipments or higher value or higher commitment ratios when we have to look at cargo movement. Today, the situation is that I'm dependent on what Aruna and Gaurav have to say, because I'm reacting to what they can do. And effectively, we literally have to focus on, okay, what are the geopolitical scenarios? Because the only thing which Gaurav alluded to in terms of fuel pricing is something which we are contingent on. Fortunately, Jeddah has been home base for us for about 25 years and counting. But the reality remains that this port, the city, being home to 2 seaport terminals and 1 airport, which is also about to introduce a little more in terms of complexity that we manage, circa the Hajj, which is around the corner. So in about less than a week's time, we have about 2 million people coming in. So it will be very interesting as to how some of the audience are going to react in terms of the cargo flows that they want to manage. Today, as a forwarder, we encourage our customers to kind of plan ahead if you can, embracing the risks that present itself. Alongside, as a GSA, we represent Malaysia Airlines since 2019. We were awarded one of the best GSAs worldwide in 2023. And it's a privilege that we have when it comes to the fact that the freighter that we moved to Amsterdam all the way from Kuala Lumpur has embraced Jeddah as its tech stop, and it's been going on. So as a GSA, we are, and a regulated agent, we're looking at the entire picture as a forwarder, regulated agent, and GSA. So yeah, as in it's been very early morning starts and perhaps very early morning ends to our days.
All right. Thanks, Jal. Gaurav, coming to you. Now, of course, we are all aware of the choke point of a Strait of Hormuz where shipping seems to be stuck. But how that is reflecting on the pressure being built in your area of service. Now, it has increased the demand for land transportation, but do we have the capacity, or how do we go about it?
So I think, land freight, because of its fragmentation, it's also, very flexible, because it doesn't take a lot for prices to go up in a certain lane for, suppliers to start choosing that lane over the other lane, right? So I think from land freight's perspective, I think the choke points are really the ports. It's like asking, a Muscat airport or a Sharjah airport to become Terminal 3 of Emirates, right? So, whether it's Korfakan or, Sohar or, whichever, I think that's really where the choke point is. And that's, I think, creating the problem also before that in the chain for the vessel to, certainly have the certainty of when they can offload certain boxes, and for the land freight connectivity after that, hey, how do we do that? Apart from the port itself, I think some of these ports also don't have the supporting infrastructure. Even if you move a few thousand trucks to that port, which was getting a few hundred trucks until February, the land infrastructure and all of that are creating constraints. However, things like Etihad Rail in the UAE are great. I think that now is, a lot of hypotheses are getting proved with the, one train carrying 200 plus boxes and 3 trains a day doing, Northern Emirates to Abu Dhabi. But apart from that, I think the typical issues are, digitization can solve a lot of things, and that is where, most of this current utilization, like I can give you an example where a container that was coming to Jebel Ali and doing Jabsa, that container was rotating 3 times, or the truck doing such container movements, doing 3 trips in a day. Now, and at that time, the Korfakan to Jebel Ali trip might be like a 6 to 7 hour trip. Now, because of the queuing and the port congestion, that 6 to 7 hour trip has become sometimes a 20-hour trip because the driver is significantly waiting. You would think that, hey, this is the time to actually increase your utilization to put 2 drivers to a truck and do 20-hour working. But then the infrastructure itself does not allow. So the trucking supply is showing that pricing impact. UAE, I think, has about 70% diesel price escalation. So, but that's not the price change you see. You see trucking supply pricing has gone up by 70 to 120%. And that's because of that supply rerouting, but also, getting choked in the inefficient manner. And this is happening with Jeddah port or feeders that are going from, some of the, ports in UAE to the northern, upper Gulf. I think it's happening everywhere. So supply, as number of trucks as the region has always been less. I keep telling, our internally and externally when I speak about this, that truckers' business model is about scaling supply. It is not so much about scaling demand. When you are able to provide a competitive price along with the working capital expectation of your enterprise client, then the demand is pretty easy to come for a trucker kind of business. It's the supply that is always the scalability challenge. And that's becoming more acute right now.
Thanks. Well said.
Can I
Yes,
maybe
sir.
add to what Gaurav said regarding choke points. I think these are very, very good pertinent points. I would want to compare this with COVID a little bit. During COVID, the bottleneck was very clear. We had port congestion and then we had container shortages, and you could point to the problem. Today, the pressure and the choke point is actually in the connections between places, or in other words, it's actually a wave of issues. The bottlenecks are shifting daily. Last week, it was truck availability on Jeddah to Dammam. This week, it's probably reefer capacity at Port Pakan. Next week, it would be customs clearance capacity for in-transit cargo somewhere. The pressure is just moving through the system like a wave. So, from my perspective, if I add on to where the biggest or fastest building pressure point is, in my mind, similar to what Gaurav said, it is the inland movement. When we reroute an ocean container from Jebel Ali to Jeddah, we are not really solving the problem because the container still needs to cross about 1,300 kilometers through the desert by truck to reach the customer. At Maersk as well, we're operating almost 4,000 to 5,000 cross-border moves per week on these land bridge corridors in the region. And that requires trucks, availability of trucks. It requires drivers, availability of drivers, border processing, depot space, custom clearance ability. And this is all for volumes for which these corridors were not built for in the first place. And if I may just add one additional pressure that I don't think we are talking about enough, and that is the decision-making speed. Our transporters in the regions, because of all the issues that Gaurav is talking about with the 70% inflation on the fuel and so on and so forth, transporters are quoting rates with a validity of 24 to 48 hours. But our customers or a lot of companies actually are set up in a system where this is all contingency planning and it requires approvals, which take more than 72 hours to get. So in my mind, decision-making speed is actually creating a huge pressure in this entire ecosystem, causing even more of a choke point.
Aruna, I was about to come to you on this one. Now, we discussed the land transit and the issues that are facing. Coming back to the ocean freight, now we have, and covering the GCC, of course, we have the Strait of Hormuz currently being blocked, and Bab el-Mandab traditionally has had its own issues in the past. Now, from risk management perspective and from maintaining a reliable schedule, shipping lines had decided to introduce new service lanes. Maybe Jeddah, which used to be in the middle of Asia-Europe service, now has become a terminal because the services are going via Cape of Good Hope, crossing into Suez, and then coming down Jeddah and going all the way back. Now, with those services being settled, more or less, to a certain extent, do you think that whether and the land capacity and the decision-making, other challenges, obviously over a period of time being resolved gradually, do you think the closure of a Strait of Hormuz is going to have a continuing impact going forward, or within giving 4 to 6 weeks time, we should start seeing a normal pattern until we are fully confident of the geopolitical situation being resolved, then only the shift back will start happening?
Thanks, Farooq. So let me break this into a couple of points, because when you started the question, you spoke about from a risk management perspective. As you know, I'm also handling cargo risk management products at Maersk. So I also want to answer almost like an unspoken question because it comes to me from various factors with respect to this additional, costs that we are also seeing. So risk is one thing, but the cost. The Strait of Hormuz was not closed by mines or the missiles. It actually was closed from our ocean shipping perspective by the insurance market. So within 48 hours of the strikes that started on the 28th of February, major P&I clubs canceled or issued cancellation notices on the war risk covers that that cover for the Persian Gulf. And war risk premium surged by, I think, 0.25% of hull value that is the normal to over 1%, which means that generally speaking, if a container vessel is valued at $150 million, then a single transit premium you would have jumped from 300,000 to almost $1.5 million. So when insurance becomes that expensive or unavailable, then vessels simply cannot, even if it is physically possible, they cannot sail straight like that. So in my mind, I also want to maybe leave some of the folks or the audience here with a few simple practical things that they should also look at from a risk and a risk management perspective. First of all, I think shippers would need to understand what and should go and look at what their contractual position is with respect to cargo insurance, because in many places, cargo insurance may or may not cover war-related delays and associated charges. And sometimes the liability then shifts to force majeure and so on. So in my mind, that's also a very important practical tip that needs to be given to some of our audience. And alongside that, I would also say whenever we or any of our customers or any shippers work with shipping companies and go into contracts, and it's also very important that you look at whether you have surcharge caps or escalation mechanisms in your contract so that you're able to cater to some of these additional costs that come your way. Then the question around resumption of services. I think there's multiple things that come into play here. Whenever we have a situation like this one or disruption, a very big associated impact is containers and the placement of containers and empty containers that get stuck. This happened also in COVID, and it's also happening over here. Because of the choke point, because ports are able to, in some cases, ports are able to discharge cargo but not able to take the empties out. We currently have a situation where empty containers are sitting potentially in surplus in places like Asia, and there are plenty of exporters who simply don't have export boxes in the Gulf. So it's not a question just of when the situation normalizes, because even if the strait opens, even when we go back to old routes, it will still take months before all these containers come into a regular flow. So that will take a lot of time. And the third question, of course, then when it comes to how soon can we actually look at that, I don't think there's anyone who can answer that question with accuracy, because there are just so many different elements that come into play. There's the crew safety, the vessel safety, and operational capabilities, the ability for a port, even if the strait is open, the ability for a port to be able to ease the congestion, to be able to come back into flow. All of these things take a little bit of time. So the effects of, even after the opening or normalization, the effect of us getting into a normal routine will take weeks and months post-opening.
Thanks, Aruna. Now, this question actually I will ask of all of you individually, starting from Jabir. We have been passing from one crisis to another since March 2020 every year, impacting our region. Even though Ukraine was a bit far away, but it did impact our region when it comes to supply of essential agricultural products. But it never seems to be a saga that we have learned from our past mistakes or things like that. So we had COVID, then we had Suez blockade, then we had Ukraine, now then we have a geopolitical situation which has Bab al-Mandab, and now we have Hormuz. Okay. Now each one brings its own unique challenges, of course. But then since the frequency of such crises, especially in our region, has been going on for past 6 years or so, do you think we have learned anything from the past to better manage ourselves, or we are just going with the flow as a government, as people, as businessmen, and as service provider? So I'll start with Jabir, and then I'll go through Gaurav and Aruna on this.
Thank you. So, Farooq, I think the reality here is, given the fact that in the previous scenarios, or let's say from COVID, I think air cargo shone to the limelight and said, okay, look, we can help. Rely on us. We changed passenger flights into carrying cargo. We had cargo on seats. I think as people, we really came together. Now, if you come and look at the current situation where the Gulf carriers have been affected more than ever, and the reality is it's not confined to this region, because if you look at cargo that is flowing, let's say from the west to the east, the reality is that, well, cargo from the Americas to the Americas and to Europe is now constrained, because when the neighboring GCC countries had to stop flights because of the situation, you lost connectivity, you lost a lot of flights, you lost a lot of capacity. We were forced to react and say, okay, what do we do now? Jeddah's airport, and I mean, I think I have to say that kudos to the authorities that have responded, and the way we as people are coming together, as stakeholders are coming together, operating across the sea, the land, and to some degree your facilities as well, is a blessing that we're all working together on in alleviating some of the strains that is presenting itself. Now, given the fact that we are now looking at also the fuel price scenarios, and I think the graph is only going one way, and is sadly going up and up and up, we are forced to react. In terms of the answer to your question of have we learned enough, I'm not entirely sure. The geopolitical folks would say yes, and I wish they would to learn, but perhaps this is human race to blame. Perhaps we're not learning enough from the debacles that we have faced. But having said that, from a customer standpoint or a stakeholder perspective, I think those customers or those stakeholders who are open to embracing the scenario and understanding the fact that, look, it's not going to be business as usual on a daily basis, then we've got to react. We've got to make good of what we can do. Today, for instance, Gulf Air, which has been the flag carrier of the GCC for a few decades prior to the advent of the Etihads and Emirates, or the Qatars and the Oman Airs, the reality has been that Gulf Air, courtesy the Dammam being operational, the Dammam as an airport, was playing home base to Gulf Air, which is fantastic to ensure that operational reliability is maintained. It is certainly a challenge when the causeway is closed, but again, we've got to react. We cannot be proactive on this. But perhaps a little bit of proactivity that we can exercise is to understand, okay, what do you really need to move? What is critical? I think someone on the chat has asked if perishables and pharma will be given priority. And I think, that's a question that we all need to embrace and understand, that when it comes to life-saving cargo, then perhaps it should be prioritized, and whether our facilities are geared up for that. I mean, look, on a very transparent basis, the majority of inquiries we are getting today is asking about, okay, can you cross-dock pharma and perishables, which is an interesting question. But again, from a Jeddah standpoint and with the authorities, we have tens of tons of cargo, which is not just confined to Jeddah, but also extends to Medina. And again, we are forced to react as opposed to proactively say we could do this. But again, the community that exists is embracing the situation to say, all right, you know what, I understand this is going on and we don't really have a proactive response that we could have given. And some of the consignees are embracing the fact that they may have to clear their shipments in Medina as opposed to Jeddah. So as a nation, I think the kingdom is gearing up and saying, look, we can do this. We are going to support this situation.
Thanks. So Gaurav, coming to you on this one. So what are we doing differently now than was in 2021 or 2020, 2021?
So let me first, I have a few points on the question about, the impact of all these disruptions and whether we've learned a lesson or not. I think I want to tackle this from the government, public sector perspective, the private sector perspective, and also then the logistics industry. I think from a government sector perspective, I think you rightly said that, COVID was the first one, but then there is Bab al-Mandab, and now Strait of Hormuz is very much a reality that everybody used to talk about, but it is, staying for at least for the next few months, right? And all these initiatives, I think I keep referring to GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. I think a lot of times the cooperation is actually missing. So, if Europe could be a 27-state country with borderless movements, regardless of which port of destination you have in Europe to move cargo anywhere else in Europe, I think it's high time that GCC, which speaks the same language, is able to, do that faster. And these kind of things are pretty clear, are not temporary. Even if they keep happening every few years, they test things. And, the lack of infrastructure, whether, an Etihad rail is a very domestic UAE infrastructure versus Saudi rail is there, but still not connected with the Etihad rail, and now Hafid rail will come up. I think these kind of asset class investments need to really accelerate. We need to come out of the phase where real estate is the biggest asset class and everybody wants to build the next biggest tower and put in $1 billion into such assets. I think these assets require some urgency. So these supply chains become more resilient and, don't break down when these things happen. And the cooperation, I think the customs cooperation can be a great start, but even like in the trucking industry, we face issues where, a Saudi truck cannot go empty into UAE and vice versa. And every trucking as a sector is very much goes through this protectionism that we want to protect our local transporters. As a platform, I don't care. Right now, Saudi Arabia has allowed a lot of UAE trucks to come empty into Saudi and stay there for 60 days. And we are witnessing a lot of, in our compliance, we would never be able to give us a UAE number plate, will never get assigned to a Jeddah Riyadh. Now that we've opened that up in our attributes in the matching, and that's allowed. So, the UAE guys are able to bid for a for a Jeddah to Riyadh. Now, these kind of things should be left to more free market. I think that will again force, a larger regional, upgrade of assets and things like that. Financial, the government should look into providing more financing to a lot of smaller, companies in logistics and land freight, wherever, right now financing is simply not available. And, this will put up pricing, which the private sector needs to understand. I think from a purchasing power parity perspective, we pay very similar to a, liter of milk in Dubai or Jeddah versus, Paris or New York. However, the percentage that we spend on transportation in that cost of, product is much lesser here. The region is blessed with expat drivers and expatriates from India, Pakistan, Egypt, Syria, who work at a lower cost, but the assets also reflect that. We pretty much don't have comparable assets to Europe or North America. I think that's where the private sector needs to shift a bit. So when tomorrow life becomes normal and you can pull all your containers to Jebel Ali for a Jebel Ali-based importer exporter, or the same for Jeddah, I think you must still be able to ensure that your resilient supply chains, where shipping lines must continue to do more volumes at some of the other ports which are outside these two choke points, the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandab, so that those supply chains remain continuously fluid. When this happens, they need to switch. Now, from a logistics company's perspective, I think for us, we must focus on digitization and transparency. The logistics industry significantly thrives on information arbitrage. My client doesn't know the right price. I'm going to make a 30% margin. This client goes through tender every 3 months, so I'm going to give him a lower percentage margin. Those kind of, thinking needs to be removed. And I think, again, free market, digitization, I think that's a big change for logistics. Otherwise, the sector, our part of the world has a lot of good infrastructure. It's not as bad as, it seems to be right now. But this is a long-term learning we should have. I don't want to comment whether we've learned from the past or not, but I think if we haven't, then this is high time that, this kind of disturbance, and the world, I think, is much more unstable now versus 5 years back. And the other thing around COVID was still a very global thing. This is very local. So logistics-wise, I think my expectation is the transshipment business in this region is gone, or not gone, like it will reduce significantly over the next few years until people are back up feeling confident about these things. And Aruna mentioned insurance. So those are competitive costs that will come up, that transshipments will become less competitive to do here. So, but we are still, 20% oil supply to the world, or 40% urea supply to the world. I don't know, I think 30% aluminum supply to the world, plus helium, and all these great things that we produce here in this region. We are blessed with the energy. I think just focusing on getting those disruption proof will be great.
Jaber, you have raised a hand. So before I go to Aruna, I'll complete, and then I'll go to Aruna. Yes, you want to say something on that?
Yes, as in just to Gaurav's point about digitalization, I mean, I just wanted to comment that, look, in all honesty, we're certainly, advocates of digitalization. I couldn't disagree with him. We, from an air cargo perspective, interactive cargo and one record, etc., are things we look forward to. But in all honesty, Gaurav, right now, with all the digitalization that's happening, I'm still reliant on a chap at a port with a mobile phone who basically says, yes, today this is working. No, we've got an update. There's another feature that has come on to the platform. And on that basis, now we've got to ask the shipping line or the broker to do something else. So I guess, it's an interesting space.
No, we are significantly investing ourselves into AI, where, we've been promoting our digital app to drivers for a very long time. In fact, if they upload the proof of delivery on the app, they get an instant cash payment voucher. But we were forced to, and AI is that opportunity of, automating your communication both ways, inbound and outbound. So now the same driver can simply provide the proof of delivery on a WhatsApp. The AI reads it, and as long as the WhatsApp's not very unclear, if it's unclear, it actually says, "Can you upload again?" But it reads it and creates the same payment voucher for him on WhatsApp. So
yeah,
I think AI should accelerate some of these things, and Maersk has a big AI initiative also that I'm aware of. So
yeah, yes, Aruna.
Just one more thing. Sorry, Aruna.
Yeah,
just one more point here is that, look, when it comes to our end on air cargo, at this point in time, we're forced to again react. And essentially what happens is we've got interline scenarios that come in. And when interline scenarios come in, unfortunately, all our online tracking is breaking. And when that happens, again, it's wonderful email that is coming to rescue, or traditional.
No, it's just,
sorry.
One big difference from 2021 and 2026 is the rise of agentic AI. This is one of the biggest difference because this has come up in the last 5 years. Yes, Aruna, before we get into the digital discussion, to you.
Thank you. Maybe
Sorry,
I'll just one comment on this digitization and technology, and then I'll try to answer your question. The only comment I have is, look, no matter how advanced our technology is, our technology or any technology could not have predicted this crisis. Technology or any AI, agentic models, etc., it cannot predict, but the best thing that technology can do or what we can make it do is how fast we can respond when something goes wrong. And in my mind, at least, the biggest thing that we can get from any technology investment is scenario simulation and the ability to model if, Jeddah gets congested, can I move my 30% of my cargo through the Oman corridor? What will happen to my costs and so on and so forth, and be able to simulate that. So that's in my mind what a good technology solution should be able to give. But then I'll try to answer your question, Farooq, where you said, have we learned anything from COVID and some of these disruptions? If you recall, after COVID, the industry reverted to their old ways within months. And I hope that this time it's actually a more structural difference. Firstly, the governments have made a very huge physical investment, which are not easily reversible. In fact, they're for the future. The $7 billion land bridge railway that Saudi has is working on, the customs reforms that have come through, the truck access liberalization that Gaurav spoke about, the Sharjah Dammam corridor, all of these infrastructure investments are actually, in my mind, gravitational pull. Once the capacity exists, the volume will flow. I think there's also quite a lot of industry analysis that is now saying or observing that shippers who have now experienced the reliability and predictability of these overland corridors in the GCC, they are actually planning to keep a portion of their volume on land permanently, even when the maritime routes may normalize. This is a really good sign. And then thirdly, the point you made, Farooq, the frequency of disruptions is only increasing, right? It's not one black swan event every 25 years that we used to have in the past. COVID, Red Sea, Hormuz, all these three major disruptions have been in under 4 years. So maintaining corridor optionality for resilience has to become a part of strategy of any company strategy. And if you think about it, there are actually a few companies that come out shining whenever disruption happens. And that is either they have made structural investments before a crisis and in times of stability when they plan for things to go wrong, and they actually start investing in. Saudi is a great example where this petrol line pipeline from the eastern province to Yambu, it was built decades ago, but it was not in response to Hormuz. But it has become a lifeline in this current scenario. So doing and making those investments at a stable time to prepare for the worst is super important. And then the other piece, at least I would say, is a lot of good companies do this. They have a muscle memory for disruption. After COVID, there are many companies that they preserved their crisis playbooks, and they kept their war rooms alive and active for scenario planning, and they run these periodic exercises. These companies activate contingency plans the minute something goes wrong because they are ready. And that is something that I feel sets apart those companies from those who are still struggling. So resilience is not should not be seen as a crisis response. It has to be an operating discipline.
Thanks. Now, picking on that discussion, of course, some of the good points we have at Unified Customs Union for over 4 decades in GCC, but it has not really been implemented, as Gaurav mentioned. And only during this crisis, we are easing out, or we are working towards resolving the issues that create a bottleneck. Even before the crisis, on and off, we had Batha situation, we had Khafji border situation, or Qatar or Saudi border situation. Now, I think the impetus would be provided, or this situation has provided impetus to this, that we really, the unified custom system are a common area. At least we, at one point, we had GCC plus, including Jordan, Syria, Levant. And these are some of the initiatives that can be undertaken during and post once, inshallah, the situation normalizes, and then we go back to the normal playbook. Coming to the cost aspect of it. Now, this is a very pointed question, and it's very, now, both land freight and ocean freight. Apparently, there is a tendency that no crisis should go wasted, okay, to boost up the balance sheet. The results have seen. Now, of course, there are economic factors in it, there are risk factors in it, whereas air cargo, I believe they shown during COVID, but their financial results did not reflect in it. There is a balance between when the price is a bit too much, or we just leave it to the desperation of the end user to decide how much they are willing to pay? I'll start with Gaurav first on this one, because currently the land freight is in focus, and then we'll talk about ocean freight on this.
No, it's a great question, and I'm happy you were asking that to me. So I am very against profiteering. In fact, in the second week of March, I published on the company, I told the teams to publish the land bridges that had gone live. I told them to start publishing rates, and to make it on our LinkedIn and other platforms. So that was primarily from the function that one, transparency was more important. So for our kind of business, because the supply is so fragmented versus shipping line, I think it's the exact opposite, where supply is extremely concentrated. The top 6 shipping lines pretty much control 70% of vessels. Trucking is not that, regardless, not GCC, not India, China, North America, is extremely fragmented. So for pricing to really become a function of being opportunistic is very hard in trucking because the fragmentation itself requires significant cartelization and all of that, So even with our kind of volumes that we do 1,500 truckloads per day, we are 1 point something % market share of trucking, right? So, and forget about the second and the third largest, they're all smaller. So it's very hard to cartelize and, profiteer. That's where we feel that the most important is the maintain transparency with the client. Like we went and told every client, sorry, I can't fulfill your volumes at your fixed rates of Q1 or H1 of this year. And, if you want me to focus on moving your cargo, you need to immediately move on spot rates. And then we started offering, based on the profile of clients, the biggest of the clients, they have visibility of exactly which transporter, which driver is working for the platform on their load and how much are they getting paid. And we've capped some of that, that 8% is the gross margin that the platform will make with some of these large clients. So I think transparency is my thing, that trucking invariably, because of fragmentation, is not able to cartelize and profiteer unfairly. And also, professional firms like us, we highly believe that clients who find you profiteering and you're waiting for that point of desperation that, hey, listen, this is the price, take it or leave it. I think those kind of things backfire in the medium to long term. Things will get normal, life will be okay. And that's when you treat the client in that manner, I think. But shipping lines, I don't know, don't want to comment on the commercial performance, but I think for shipping lines, the bigger you are, you can keep that approach for a long time, take it or leave it, because, 6, 7, vessel operators own a large chunk of vessels.
All right. Thanks, Gaurav. Aruna, is this the kind of an internal working, take it or leave it to the clients, or there is much more human aspect to it as well?
I would actually reframe the question, Farooq, before I answer it the way you have asked. I think we asked the wrong question, cost or margin versus, service or, customer. In my mind, the real question is, what is the cost of failure? If we are importing reefer cargo, if I'm a customer and I'm importing reefer cargo, if it is food or pharmaceutical, and I try to optimize it for cost, waiting for the cheaper ocean route to reopen, then I'm risking spoiling my cargo, I'm risking expiry, I'm risking stock out, I might even be risking regulatory penalties because, as a pharmaceutical, perhaps I need to ensure that the cargo needs to be there at destination. So, and all of these costs that I would have to bear as a customer would be far more than the trucking premium or an ocean premium that I'm trying to avoid. If someone is exporting petrochemicals and they miss their delivery window, then they're going to lose a contract that they may have spent 2-3 years to win. So the cost of the additional, ocean premium or land premium is probably not the right comparison. The cost of inaction is the right question. And I know that said, of course, cost discipline will still matter. What I would, in my mind, what I would recommend is to really, from a customer lens, I would say, segment your cargo ruthlessly. Critical cargo, what is my critical cargo? It's going to be food, medicine, production inputs, or anything that has very hard deadlines, which will stop my production line and so on. What is that critical cargo? Segment that. That should be routed through the fastest available corridor, regardless of the cost premium, because the cost of inaction is going to be too high. Then we have the standard cargo, which may, we can look at other alternatives within acceptable transit times. And then there's low priority cargo, which can sit somewhere in a temporary storage if it is already on the water or something like that. So from a Maersk lens, I think towards our customers, we've also operationalized it. For priority cargo, we give the option to use the Red Sea ports and the Oman East Coast as entry points and then give the, cross desert trucking. For non-essential flows, we are giving options of putting it in storage, rerouting it to a different destination, or redirecting it, or, returning it to the origin, and so on and so forth. So from our perspective, we are giving customers structured choices. And then it is a question of whether customers have actually segmented their own cargoes properly, correctly or not. So that's how I would answer that question.
All right. Thanks, Aruna. Javed, coming to you. Maybe in air freight, it is not that big of a concern because, as you already mentioned, 3% volume, 33% value. So even if the air freight price goes up as compared to the value, it is still insignificant. Whereas in ocean and land freight, it has a bigger impact. Do you agree with that assessment, or you have a different opinion on that?
So let me answer that with data. If you look at the stats in terms of the rising air cargo volumes from Saudi Arabia, in terms of export volumes, now we all know import volume, the country has been a fantastic importer for decades. But if you look at the recent air cargo volumes in terms of exports, then what I find interesting is that if you compare the Western region of Jeddah and Medina and Riyadh and Dammam, Riyadh and Jeddah go nearly head to head in terms of air cargo volumes. Now, I find that interesting for the simple reason that Dammam has oil and gas. Riyadh is, aside from being the, let's say, the political capital, is also very steadily growing as, let's say, the commercial capital of not just Saudi Arabia, but also perhaps the region. Giving some of our neighboring countries a run for their money, whether it be new conferences, whether it be new commercial avenues, etc. Now, when it comes to Jeddah and Medina, I think the reality becomes the air cargo volumes, when you look at the seasonality involved, it is heavily contingent on the Hajj and Umrah traffic. Now, from a cargo perspective, air cargo volume goes through the roof in the 2 months that is closest to the Hajj. So you have phase 1 where pilgrims come in and phase 2 when the pilgrims depart. But air cargo volumes and the destinations that it goes to is generally where the largest contingents of pilgrims come from. So here, aside from a commercial aspect, like Aruna has just mentioned, you look at what is the most valuable segment of your air cargo volumes. Then again, you could segment it and say, okay, look, these companies need to have that air cargo capacity or space allocations. But at the same time, it seems like human emotion is what drives the cargo volumes from the airports of Jeddah and Medina.
Yeah.
So, commercial aspects are more aligned now with the 2 terminals of Jeddah being moving multimodal transport, whether it is in by air or out by air, because the reality is we are being asked for almost all types of commodities, for support for all types of commodities.
Thank you, Job. It's really interesting to note the responses and diverse opinion on this one. And we are getting into the end of our session, but before going into closing remarks, would like to address a couple of questions, especially with regards to food. There is a query, and it's a long query, but I will rephrase it in 2 ways. Especially this is now for food and refrigerated cargo. Is capacity is the issue, or availability at the right point is the issue? So first with Aruna and then with Gaurav on that one. We are talking about movement of refrigerated cargo from one end to another. So do we have total capacity available?
It's a mix of both. Of course, there's to some extent a capacity issue as well. Is this question more specific to refrigerated cargo per se, or because I think the other angle to this from a reefer perspective is I think the availability of genset equipment as well. So when the strait closed, there were hundreds of loaded containers that were stranded at the upper Gulf ports, or even on vessels where they could not discharge. So that leads to a capacity problem. But at the same time, especially from a refrigerated equipment perspective, there's also a genset constraint. I think that is probably very important from a food and refrigerated cargo perspective. from a Maersk angle, reefer equipment generally gets constrained because of the lack of genset equipment. And what we have done is to redirect as much as possible from our global network the gensets that are available anywhere to actually move into Saudi specifically to address the gap with reefer equipment. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. All right. But Gaurav, now it's more pointed towards you, basically. Now you are into transport and genset. Actually, if you're moving refrigerated cargo, genset does become critical aspect. But generally, before going into a specific of this question, how you at Trucker differentiate between the normal dry cargo and the refrigerated cargo, and what is unique about refrigerated cargo? What is special that you, from a service provider perspective, look at than any other business?
Yeah, sure. For context, Trucker does not do pharmaceuticals, and Trucker does not do things like ice cream. And then that's primarily because of the supply-demand gap is not very big, so aggregators don't really play. Most of these kind of clients are fixed with a asset-heavy fleet owner who's got dedicated assets operating with a fixed client. And then these products also are, the threshold to price sensitivity is quite low, like air freight, where they are okay for their trucks to keep coming back empty and just keep doing the same loop, right? So we don't do those two segments, but other than that, perishables, we do a lot. And I feel the genset thing is right now is acute. Saudi Arabia has run out of gensets. In fact, some people are trying to figure out to get some gensets from UAE to go to Saudi. And I think Maersk is significantly, crunched in Jeddah port right now with gensets. So I won't comment about the genset, which seems to be more of a temporary thing because of rerouting of so much of, containers that have happened. But in the reefer business itself, the supply of reefer trucks or quality reefer trucks is significantly lower than the, flatbed or side curtains. And I think that's primarily, again, to one of the earlier points I was referring to, availability of commercial bank financing for a lot of these small transporters is next to, zero, right? So most of the times when you look at our supply, the reefer suppliers are actually medium-sized transporters to big transporters because they are the ones who at least paid, a couple of 100,000 riyals to import a 5-year-old reefer from Europe. They also don't buy brand new reefers, which they should, and be able to recover that. But that supply constraint is driven by the lack of financing at the SME and the entrepreneurial level of the individual transportation sector operators. And that's where, if you see reefer, typically demands a higher price, even though moving 20 tons of reefer is not that much more expensive than moving 20 tons of steel. It's just the additional air conditioning, your compressor consuming more diesel, but the price differential is much more. That reflects the lack of assets, and that's also where you see firms like Rawabi and Al Marai and these guys pretty much buy their assets or lease or own those kind of assets because they don't want to be subject to the market availability of such critical supply chains for them. While a lot of more sensitive FMCG players and all of that, they still rely on the availability of these trucks. So to answer your question, yes, supply is constrained. I think gensets is constrained, and that's a great investment opportunity for whoever is looking at the trucking asset class.
All right. Thanks, Gaurav. Now, a final round. Very much appreciate the detailed thoughts on this one. Javed, coming to you. For an end user or consumer, what is one single piece of advice that you will give that to manage the current situation better and align our future prospects in today's environment?
Cool. Thank you, Farooq. Just before I answer that, could I just respond to Gaurav's statement regarding the gensets?
Okay.
I mean, I think it's interesting. And yes, I'm at the receiving end of a lot of requests asking for gensets and asking for more gensets. But I also think that the timing right now is interesting because I can also, again, share that from an air cargo perspective. There's a lot of cargo that comes in to cater to the Hajj project or the Hajj program. I don't know if people are aware, but there's about 500 tons of spices that come in from the Far East just to cater for one country by air. And of course, given it is food, and the Saudi Food and Drug Authority places a lot of emphasis on the quality of transport that is assigned. I mean, I still have my issues with the fact that it's one of those dumb data loggers which is used, and I don't like that. I would like more active data loggers being used so that, in real time, you can understand what is going on with your cargo, whether that be the temperature, the humidity, the light sensitivity, etc., or just in very simple terms, the location. Now, so having said that, I think that also contributes to the timing of this crisis that we're facing, because again, the gensets are perhaps already dedicated to some movement. But to go back to your question, Farooq, about how do we respond, I think we've got to take into account the reality that as one city which has not been used to a peak outside the Hajj pilgrimage when it comes to transportation requirements, we've got to be quite appreciative of the workforce that is at the ports, at the bonded zones, at the vessels, and appreciate the fact that they are actually doing what they can. And also the authorities reacting to this are reacting as best as they can. I believe there's an observatory that has been set up by the Ministry of Transport, aligning the stakeholders across all the three major forms of transport. Besides that, I think it's amazing. I mean, to Aruna's point about insurance, it's obviously quite a task when it comes to dealing with those increased prices. And again, from an average perspective, of course, no doubts that we are on a per kilo basis going through a certain peak that is reminiscent of what we've had during COVID. But hopefully it doesn't get to that and someone sees better sets. But what I would also say, again, I think Gaurav has alluded to this in terms of the digitalization. This has bred that ability to say, okay, guys, can we digitalize? I mean, look, from my perspective, the EVA bill or the Master Bill of Lading or the Seaway bill, they haven't changed. And it's been decades since I'm looking at the EVA bill. I've seen it as a child. I'm a second generation logistics guy. So I've seen it as a child and it hasn't changed. Some of that input could be simplified far more, because then we could actually be more responsive as opposed to reactive. And I think, from my perspective, we need to expect the unexpected and be prepared for scenarios that we need to be able to actually engage with in better shape. Aligning the stakeholders, if we align air, sea, and land, then I think we are better prepared. So what I would say to the end consumer is to try and work with brands or with forwarders that you can understand, have the relationships and perhaps the reach to give you solutions that can serve your needs best. That would be my takeaway from this.
Aruna?
Yeah, if I could give maybe one recommendation, it would really be to build corridor diversity into your logistics permanently as a core capability and not as a contingency plan. So, for example, right now, most of us are treating our land bridge corridors and all these east-west port routes, rerouting, multimodal solutions, etc., as temporary workaround. With the expectation that we are doing this because Hormuz is closed, and we'll stop doing it when the situation normalizes and when everything reopens. In my mind, that would be a mistake. Even if the industry analysts are saying that shippers, we know that, I think we mentioned this also, that the shippers have now experienced the reliability of the land bridge. So there is a chance that a lot of them will continue to use this because it makes sense, and especially with the structural investments that have been put in by the governments into this kind of contingency infrastructure can become the new normal. So if you think about the pattern in the last few years that we spoke about, this Red Sea, Hormuz, the lesson that we are learning is not that any one choke point is unreliable, but the lesson that we are learning is that any choke point can become unreliable at any point. So the answer is not about predicting the next disruption. It's really about making sure that we have a logistics network that does not depend on having to even predict it. I'm not sure if I'm clear, right? But the intention from my side is to say that we need to be practical to maintain active relationships with multiple port gateways. We must maintain our logistics to operate on multiple, contingency corridors. We must keep our customs clearance capabilities to be current across corridors, because you never know when you might need it. We must always try to invest in technology that lets us plan for these kind of scenarios, and most importantly, not to treat these crisis premiums as wasted cost. In fact, the way I would ask customers to or end consumers to approach it is to treat it as a tuition cost for building a network that can survive the next crisis. The best and the most efficient supply chain is not necessarily the cheapest one. It's the one that will not break when the condition changes and disruptions happen.
Thanks. Well said. Gaurav, your take on this?
To be honest, I put a blog sometime in March where I feel that this is actually an opportunity for the GCC. GCC, just from the intrinsic nature of the leadership and the blessed leadership that we have, and being a capital, of cash or investments, we're flush with capital here. I think this needs to be the same as what happened in the subprime crisis and the COVID crisis and all these kind of crises. I think we emerge stronger and, come out higher. I think this needs to be used rather than seeing that, hey, we have two challenges of the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb. I think this needs to be used that, hey, listen, we have extremely resilient supply chains that operate as efficiently as a Jeddah port or a Jebel Ali port for transshipment, where, we now have significant assets on the east and western edge that actually creates a more efficient land corridor in normal times. And I think that's where, whether it's private sector or governments and, all these different things we spoke about today, I think if those things become an investment case to be executed now versus investment case done by a expensive consultant and that lies on somebody's desk for quarters, I think it would be quite interesting to get those investment cases operated now. Shipping lines can continue to use the land bridge as a definite solution to reduce transit times, whether it is Bab el-Mandeb or disruption or having to go around Africa. I think we could be what an Emirates Airlines is for the air freight. That transshipment thing can actually be a value proposal for the region rather than being a contingency plan.
Work in progress.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gaurav, and all my fellow panelists on this webinar. I will just some of the key takeaways. One, of course, the common area customs unions, which is frictionless movement of goods. I would ideally call it goods, people, and capital, but I think we are far from movement of capital and people. But at least if we can have border-free movement of goods, drivers, and trucks, that would be ideal. The use of technology, AI, definitely to improve the visibility and reliability, and also a better planning, treating the crisis as a go-to for the future deployment and future strategy is one of the key learnings. Once again, thank you very much all. I believe it has been very interesting for our audience in this way, is this webinar. And we'll be coming back because with another one in future, inshallah, about moving away from containers and air freight and more getting into industrials and bulk and ro-ros in our next session. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye. It was good having, being here. Bye-bye.